Welcome to Education Leadership for a Digital World, a Digital Promise webinar series supported by the Wallace Foundation. I'm Beverly Hutton, Deputy Executive Director at the National Association of Secondary School Principals, and today's webinar is Building Capacity in Crisis, Using Design Thinking to Lead. Education leaders face change at a rapid pace as the education landscape around standards, professional development, and funding continues to shift. The Long Beach Unified School District is working to provide meaningful change while leading strategically and with the heart. I'm hoping that you will leave this webinar today understanding three things: the Long Beach Unified School District's commitment to strategically lead from the heart, how design thinking has influenced evaluation and coaching in Long Beach, and how design thinking has and can be used to address your school and district challenges. Our panelist today is Nader Twal, and he describes himself as a lead learner. Nader is the program administrator in the Long Beach School District's Office of Curriculum, Instruction, and Professional Development. He will share how design thinking methodology was actualized in their district in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic. We have lots of information to share, and towards the end of the webinar, Nader will give some tips on how you might use design thinking principles to address the challenges you face in your districts and organizations. We welcome your questions and ask you to please use the Q&A feature to post your questions, and we will address them toward the end of today's presentation. Welcome, Nader. Nader, both of our organizations have been a part of the Wallace Foundation's Principal Pipeline Initiative for several years. And through that affiliation, we understand the critical role school leaders play in system structures, in student success, and direct support for principals. Long Beach participated in the NASSP School Leaders Academy, which uses design thinking methodology as its theoretical framework. My team still talks about their experiences with your colleagues, about how receptive they were and how easily they coalesced around the design thinking concepts. Given that rapid pace of change school leaders face now, the changes are occurring against a backdrop of an international pandemic and a public outcry for systemic justice. We as education leaders and education institutions must respond with a balance of urgency and coherence. So let's look at the first slide. Adversity does not build character, it reveals it. This quote, I think that everyone that's listening, everyone that's watching, can all attest to that, especially in the face of this crisis that we've never seen in our lifetime and probably could never have imagined. So Nader, how does this quote specifically speak to you and your experience in Long Beach?
So I love this quote, and I love this quote for a number of reasons. I think most people have heard, adversity builds character. But when crisis hits, responses have to be timely, so it tends to reveal your core values and the things that have become automatic. It's a lot like muscle memory, right? What you've trained yourself to do is going to be the way that you respond. And so the way that we responded to COVID initially revealed kind of the core values that we had. Now, it also reveals things that maybe aren't as exciting and opportunities for growth. And so how we learn and grow from that experience, I think, is what builds the character of the organization and also our personal character as members of that organization. So, COVID for us revealed some wonderful things about our system, and it also revealed some of our opportunities for growth. And I think if you go to the next slide, the timeline that necessitated the response, I think is going to be very familiar to a lot of people. I was actually sitting in the office next door, March 13th, and we were talking about what would it look like for us to go online. We had been talking about it for a week, and we thought we had a little bit more time. And then that morning, massive districts in California began to shut down one after the other. And what we thought was going to be a 5 to 2 week process of planning became a 2-hour process of planning. And we had decided by noon on March 13th that schools were going to close. And initially we were closing them for 5 weeks. And then that became the duration of the school year. And about a week ago, it looks like we're going into fall with online learning, that there is going to be no hybrid model initially, and that there isn't going to be any in-place, in-person classes. And so, in situations like that, you've got one or two responses that you're probably conditioned to do. And that's what's reflected on the next slide. You're either going to be reactive or responsive. And so when we think about reactive, and we're using the work of Dr. Kathy Kramer of the Kramer Institute here, the reactive is that gut response. It's that panic response where you get this high level of alert, stress, and you respond with a deficit mentality. You're focusing on what are the holes, and you're using every finger in the organization to plug those holes. So you're taking all of this talent, and the goal is to keep it from like falling apart. Well, that's important, but it's absent a coherent strategy. What you're doing is you're taking the hands that could be doing the work and you're using them to plug holes. And so it's a focus on the immediate and pressing. And sometimes if we just take a beat, and I'm not talking about like a 16-month strategic planning moment, but if we take a beat and think about what might it look like for us to be responsive, that offers a more strategic option. It's the point where you hit pause and you begin to thoughtfully and intentionally adapt your behavior to your current circumstances. So what you do is you pause. What are our core values? What are we about? What are we anchored in? And then how does it manifest in this context? So instead of changing your purpose, what you're doing is you're adapting your purpose and response to the situation. And you're gathering information rapidly. So notice that responsive doesn't mean untimely. It just means that you hit pause for a second and gather correct information to have the best response for right now as you adapt and move forward, because it's not always a perfect response. And so then you begin to digest the situation, calibrate, respond, and re-respond. And so it's a very complementary to reactive, but instead of taking the hands and plugging, holes with the fingers, you kind of take a beat, look around, and maybe you realize there's a whole bunch of cork that you can use to plug the holes, and use your hands to actually reposition the dam and rethink what you're going to do so the entire thing doesn't flood the city. I'm happy to say that, I feel like we were responsive for the most part.
That's an excellent point. I'm very interested in hearing how our participants feel their districts responded to the COVID-19. So there's a poll up on the screen, and it says, how would you describe your district's response to COVID-19? Please take a moment to respond to that poll. And as soon as that is done, I'm hoping that those results will pop up. Look at that. Look at that. The majority of the people are saying that their districts were reactive. We can talk about that a little bit as we go on, but that's very interesting. It's also encouraging that some people were responsive as well, but that's a little bit concerning. Okay, so I just put the next slide up because I want to talk about that as well. I'm thinking, since everyone is saying, or most people are saying, that the districts were responsive to them, were reactive to them, this quote is even more important than we thought it was going to be before we started, Nader. So let's give everybody a few moments, I should say, to read the quote, and then I'd like to dig into it a little bit. In reading that quote, I'm especially struck by the relationship between the principals and the principal supervisors that Dr. Baker alludes to, and she's your incoming superintendent. Good for you. I'm very happy for Jill. That relationship was critical in you all being able to pivot as well as you did when this crisis started. And you all, and Long Beach has a long-standing culture of implementing strong leadership systems. And that's why you're here with us, and you're using design thinking methodology to do that. But that process includes the voice of principals. So how would you say that those foundational principles help to navigate the sets of questions that you got from staff and students and parents and teachers and all of those right at the onset of the pandemic? Can you tell us about that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the core values of, you alluded to the design thinking and how it's influenced a lot of this work is the idea of listening first and responding second, or listening first and designing second. And you'll see in the quote that Dr. Baker has here that the listening is what builds that trust and relationship. And when you think about crisis, like an earthquake happens, a tsunami, something, I'm sorry, I'm from California. Those are the examples I have. Perhaps it's tornadoes or something else somewhere else. But the impulse is to cry out for mommy, to cry out for comfort, to cry out for people with whom you have a relationship of high trust, and you feel that there's a sense of protection that comes with that trust. It doesn't mean that they don't tell you the truth about yourself. It means that you believe that your care is in their hands and that they actually want you to do well. And so, when you think about the crisis that hit all of us, this relationship that the principal supervisors and principals had formed, which had been replicated across departments, it wasn't unique to that relationship, but it was beautifully modeled in that relationship. People turned to where they were getting the support and believed that they would continue to get the support. And so, in the words of Dr. Baker from the same article from which this quote is pulled, she alludes to the fact that, because of how we built our principal supervision practices, which again filtered into other departments, principals quickly looked to their supervisors for that direction, the comfort, and the answers. And honestly, COVID was a huge pivot for our system. Dr. Baker will talk about that. We tend to, be really good at directing, and we give clear expectations for our schools, but we also give principals and others the latitude to make their own decisions for their building. But we're a pretty tight ship. In this case, when the crisis hit, the principal's response, and actually interdepartmentally, our response was, we need you to lead us. What can we do? And so when you think about the sequence that we followed, in terms of our curriculum office, not just the principal supervisors, but even within our own organization as the curriculum department, we talked about that whole responsiveness and taking a minute to take a beat. Week one for us was just pause. This is a disruption in people's lives. So we asked our teachers to go home and to just figure out, what does it look like to be a mom, dad, spouse, significant other with people in your own home that you're now having to teach while you teach 180 other kids if you're in secondary. I mean, it is a paradigm shift. It is not something we're trained for. So while they're reorienting the whole idea of Maslow before Bloom, trying to figure out what they're going to do, we also have to make sure that our kids are fed, that they have the Chromebooks, that we've actually equipped them for this online learning that we're probably going to shift to. So we just took a minute to prepare the system. Centrally, we began to build out the things that would support the teachers in the implementation. So as we began to look at weeks 2 to 4, it became about launching that system. Now, you don't need to read every bullet here because you'll have the slide deck after, but the idea was, okay, we've taken a beat, let's try it. This launch, the system was high process, low content. So it was standards aligned, it was online, we provided a lot of webinars and trainings, but kids weren't being assigned grades so that they could figure out, what does this look like? When we realized this was going to extend beyond the 5-week mark, we began to realize we can't just do more of the same. And so we began to focus on building internal capacity for digital learning. So the curriculum and instruction office began to cross-train in, what are our learning priorities? The unit guides, the way they're designed, can't continue the way that they are. We've got to build some instructional moves that are common across content areas. So when teachers are talking to us, we're saying the same thing in the same way, and then providing them with the digital pedagogy that they need, to do virtual learning in a meaningful way. And so when weeks 6 through 12 came out, it became about saturating that into the system, not just keeping that wealth of information with us and amplifying the practices of the field. The cool thing about crisis is that it doesn't care what your title is, right? Like, titles don't impress a crisis, right? And so we began to see these amazing hidden gems rise up. And we were now positioned to amplify their voice and practice, having them share with their peers what they were going to do. It
What did
was,
you do?
oh, it was unbelievable. We began to take virtual office hours that we were using to coach teachers and began to bring in practitioners from the field to share their practice and peer coach one
Oh,
another around, here's what I'm actually doing live. So it's not just curriculum office suggesting, it's here's my lived experience and
mhm.
here's what you can do too. So when you go into weeks 12 and 13, it becomes about, we have to realign our concept of teaching and learning, right? It's not more of the same slap technology on. It
Mhm.
became, what does it look like to have deep values around digital pedagogy anchored in our teaching and learning framework? So as we look to the fall now, we're revisioning our system priorities. And so, a lot of times we get asked, well, how did you do that, right? Well, what happened?
Right.
Well, it didn't just happen. This is something that happens over time. And so I've tried to think about how do I distill it in maybe a formula, right? Like what conditions situated us to build the capacity as we did. And one of
Let
the
me
things
ask you
that
a question. Let
please,
me ask you a question.
sure.
What happened? What did you do to help those teachers that were really maybe technology shy or didn't feel that their skills were there? How did you build their capacity?
Well, three ideas come to mind right away. One was that we built Google Classrooms for teachers to experience the Google Classroom as a student, but we populated it with lessons that they could actually take and drop into their own Google Classrooms while they were trying to figure out the technology. So to
Oh,
maintain a continuity of learning experience for the kids, we actually built classrooms for the teachers that they could begin to take content in and drop into their own. We
right.
also provided over 80 webinars on different technology applications multiple times that were attended by an average of about 1,000 to 1,500 teachers a week for about 4 weeks. And then we also launched, for those that needed more differentiated support, a one-on-one digital mentorship program where those amazing stars that were rising up from the field could, for whatever the need was, coach a peer through the transition, because a webinar is not enough for someone that is either technophobic or is new to this game, because we were trained to be in the classroom with our kids,
Right.
right? We're not trained technologists, although we are learners and we've adapted it. We lay out a banquet table and we invite kids to the table. Our goal isn't for kids to look at us through a window and we wave and tell them how great the meal is, which is really what
Right.
happened here. We took kids out of the classroom, put them at home, and then gave them a window into our classroom. It's not the same experience.
It is
And
not.
some people are going to need additional support for that. And so we had to differentiate the level of support that people had, and the commitment was defined by the need. So if you're a teacher that just needed a quick answer, then you met once, you got your answer and you left. But if you needed a 3-week commitment, then the digital mentor sat with you through that 3 weeks and we would revisit it at the end. But when you look at that though, it happened in a context. And that
Mhm.
context for us was coherent systems built over time. It wasn't like magically March 13th, everything fell into place, but also a designed mindset anchored in empathy. The idea that we have to be willing to experiment with our heart leading so that we could have a coordinated and responsive leadership posture. And I think that coherent systems is the part that tends to be a mystery to people. And so we really love Dr. Fullen's work around this, Dr. Fullen and Dr. Quinn. And they have a beautiful quote on the next slide that really kind of explains what they call a coherence framework anchored in focusing direction, cultivating collaborative cultures, securing accountability, and deepening learning. But I'd like to give people just a moment to look at the quote, and
Mhm.
then maybe we can surface some of the salient points.
Nader, when you talk about the framework, which I'd love to hear about, can you talk about how you were able to build the capacity of parents as well, given the fact that they're all teaching their children at home at that time? Were you able to put some strategies and some tactics in place within this framework to build their capacity as well?
So I would say that it didn't happen within this framework, but that it was an
Okay.
outgrowth of the framework, because the framework is really intended as an internal calibration, right? So it's not necessarily a community facing model, But if
Yes.
this model isn't in place, then we can't possibly communicate a coherent message to the community. So concurrent to going and building all of our online systems for teachers, we also built online supports for parents, including helplines and things of the sort. What's really interesting, and I appreciated this, John Vanderwall in the chat while we were doing this talked about, why are we building systems that respond to a crisis rather than using crisis to design systems that align with student agency and brain development? And he brings up the point that, design thinking looks at the impossible and creates scenarios that meet students where they are.
Mm-hmm.
What's cool about it is the reason design thinking is so powerful in building coherent systems is that when you look at the definition here of what coherence is, it's about building a shared depth of understanding about the nature of the work. It's not me telling you, here's the strategic plan. It's us rallying around that focused direction that's defined in a strategic plan and making meaning for ourselves and collectively, right? And it requires a whole lot of interaction and massaging, and you never actually arrive at it. So if you look at we actually have, I want to break it apart and kind of tell our story around that. So if you look at how we've actualized that coherence framework on the next slide, it really comes down to those 4 elements. When you think about focusing direction to build collective purpose, for us, that really is anchored in a strategic plan. But what makes it different is that our local accountability plan is aligned to it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that we co-constructed with our community. And I mean that sincerely, not figuratively. Like, it was truly a meaning-making process that we did together. So we didn't tell them, here's what we're thinking. Do you like it? Can we rubber stamp it? It really was, what are the priorities that we need to share? When we began to think about then, we internally have to be able to make meaning around this. That's where that cultivating collaborative cultures really comes in.
Mm-hmm.
Because you need to be thinking about, the next element of the coherence framework where, oftentimes you have like curriculum and supervision as kind of like parallel processes. So what does it look like to put them in the same room together to make meaning of what does it look like to actualize the strategic plan so that what we're doing in curriculum and instruction is actually being supported by supervision, and what is being seen in supervision helps us to refine and define some curriculum and instruction and professional development priorities. The fantastic thing, oh, go ahead. Sorry, Dr. Haddon.
So I see a really interesting question that I think you can address in the same context.
Sure.
It's from somebody in the chat said, what new capacities did you develop as a leadership team, and what new capacities did your principals and principal supervisors develop during this time?
Actually, if I can do the next 2 things, I think we're going to be able to address that very directly. I actually think that's spot on. I love that question. That sounds like Rochelle from Wallace.
It's Rochelle.
So I love it. I love it. We know our folks, right? And so when you look at the next thing, the idea here is that there was a teaching and learning framework that didn't shift, right? Mm-hmm. Teaching and learning and the definition of quality teaching and learning didn't change for us. The context did. And so when we think about the capacities that we had to develop, the capacity had to respond to the context. Remember that we are trained to supervise, to support, and to design unit guides that are intended for in-person instruction supplemented with technology. Well, this paradigm flipped it upside down because we couldn't even teach or supervise absent technology. Mm-hmm. So what leadership capacities did we have to develop? Well, adaptability and flexibility were at the top of the list. Right. But we also had to shift our perspective from the need to be experts to being lead learners. I have no expertise in COVID. It didn't exist before this year. But what I do have is expertise that I can bring to bear in this new situation. And what I need to do is adapt to it. But what's fantastic is that absent that securing internal accountability, which is the last element of this tree in this framework, I don't know what success criteria I'm working off of. So if the target keeps shifting, then what am I responding to? I'm responding to my internal calibration of, well, this feels right now. Well, I have internal accountability because we're all anchored in a common language around what excellence looks like for me as a practitioner, not just for the student and the teacher around teaching and learning, but as a leader, I know what the target is. So when the context shifts, my commitment to supervision evaluation, my commitment to organization management, my commitment to strategy and planning doesn't change. My context does. And so now I have to adapt what I do to this new context. And so I would say that the capacity that shifted was we actually had to actualize that flexibility and adaptability. And no longer was technology the add-on, technology became the vehicle through which I was exercising my leadership.
Mhm.
And that's an interesting paradigm shift.
Yeah, you talked in our prep about the concept of the learner versus the knower. Does that
Yes,
apply there?
it applies deeply. So, Dr. Brene Brown and her work has really influenced us. And, she's going to talk, and I think there's a quote a little bit later that we're going to talk about in terms
Mhm.
of just brave leadership, daring leadership. Armored leadership is when your walls go up and, the goal is to be right, right? Like you got to be the knower. Like people are looking to you for answers. So you have to be able to provide the answers. Otherwise, you lose your credibility.
Right.
Well, she talks about daring leadership is when you lean into the unknown. And in daring leadership, it's not about being right, it's about getting it right. And getting it right sometimes means I don't know what I don't know, but I know how to learn it. And so, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say to myself, I have never lived through a pandemic. I think the last one was in the early 1900s. Not sure that the data, I mean, there's some learning from there, but I'm pretty confident they didn't have technology in the way that we do now. And so there's no way that I can use it as a point of reference or as a manual. But what I can do is take what I do know about good teaching and learning, phenomenal leadership, and I can begin to experiment with solutions in a way that isn't going to do harm to children. And so, when you look at the next slide, I think that's where that whole design mindset anchored in empathy is going to be very critical.
Mhm.
Um, it's important for us to be thinking about that we need to maintain our orientation as learners and not knowers, because crises aren't predictable. There's no manual. And so learners are willing and expect to make mistakes in the learning process, right? They're willing to fail when they go into uncharted waters. And the way that it was really spoken to me by a mentor of mine, which I really loved, is they said, don't ever let perfection get in the way of excellence.
Ah,
Like, you have to think about fail as an acronym. And I saw this at a high school in Oceanside, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have t-shirts made. Fail, first attempt in learning. And I was thinking, what an interesting paradigm shift. And irony of ironies, this morning, my cousin posted a quote on Instagram that I thought was brilliant too. She said, more people would learn from their mistakes if they weren't so busy denying them.
I love it.
Yeah, I
It
think that came from
redefines
someone else.
failure.
I
It
loved it.
redefines it.
It does. And it's okay because the design mindset situates you for that. Like the goal is not to be right. The goal is to get it right and to gather the information quickly to get you closer to doing right.
Mm. And here we are in this time when we're all charged with leading with empathy and this public outcry for systemic justice.
Mm-hmm.
And this process seems to fit so well into coming up with the um, prototypes or the solutions, or to begin to even come together and ideate around those solutions, because that whole process starts with empathy.
Mm-hmm.
The whole design thinking process starts with empathy. I'm very interested in what you're saying, because this whole growth, all of these coherent systems don't function smoothly unless people have a growth mindset,
Mm-hmm.
and a willingness to fail quickly. I liked your concept of failing quickly so that we can arrive at the solution sooner.
Yeah. Yeah.
Talk about that growth mindset and this experience, your experience in Long Beach of bringing people along.
Well, I think that, with growth mindset, it's anchored in this whole idea of agency, right?
Mm.
Like the idea that I have power and I have the ability to do something and to be a part of a solution. And it's how and if you really think about the difference between technical and adaptive changes and things that actually last, in technical changes, we look for the quick solutions that we can plug and chug, right? Which goes back to that whole reactive response.
Right.
With adaptive change, it requires lasting change, things that really soak into the bones. It requires a growth mindset because you have to be willing to fail forward, right? And you have to be willing to own a part of the solution. So the people with the problem actually join in the work of solving it. And so, you talked about bringing people along. Design thinking assumes that you can't meet a need until you've lived a need. And sometimes you can't live the need. So you bring the people with the need into the conversation and elevate not only their voice, but use their experience to anchor your response. Because honestly, everything that we're doing is in service to someone. And so we have to be very clear on who that someone is, or who those someones are. And we have to calibrate ourselves. It's not a one conversation. It's a recalibration and a calibration over time. And so, again, Dr. Brene Brown really does a phenomenal job of giving you the permission to do that, right? Giving you the permission to think about courageous leadership in the context of vulnerability.
Absolutely. Talk about how you engage the parent community in this concept. When you talk about bringing those constituents in to hear from them to help you craft and design solutions, how did you do that with the parent community?
So prior to COVID or post-COVID?
Well, I would hope that prior goes into post. However you want to discuss that.
Well, I mean, prior to COVID, obviously there are structures that are in place. We have a parent university. We have an equity access college and career readiness office that has a staff committed to multilingual outreach to parents, convening meetings within the community. COVID has really changed that, because with COVID, we can't actually physically be with people. So what we saw was the rise of multiple helplines. We created Google Voice lines that were language specific. We began to simulcast our board meetings, board workshops, key presentations in 3 languages simultaneously, so that if you were Khmer, or if you spoke Khmer, or if you spoke Spanish, you could actually join in the learning originally. We began to do webinars in key online resources that parents would need to sit along their children to help them. And those began to get translated into the multiple languages and then posted on YouTube so parents could access them over time. We created help guides and videos that were specific to parents sitting alongside their kids, guiding them, probably what a lot of different districts did. But it had to constantly be adapted based on the feedback that we were getting from them. So it wasn't a one and done. There had to be an ongoing conversation. And some parents, the help guide was great. Some needed the helpline, and they needed someone to sit with them for 45 minutes, negotiating the next steps. And the reality was, sometimes people didn't go to the helpline, they came to us, and we always took the call.
Oh, then let's go to the next slide, because I really want to read the quote from Brene Brown. What, if anything, about the way people are leading today needs to change in order for leaders to be successful in a complex, rapidly changing environment where we're faced with seemingly intractable challenges and an insatiable demand for innovation? And then it goes down to say we need braver leaders and more courageous cultures. We hear the term brave, fearless, courageous leadership in the ed space a lot these days, even before COVID happened. And they began to almost feel like buzzwords. But I don't want us to lose the potency of the idea. So talk about what braver leadership and those courageous cultures look like in Long Beach, and how does embracing that style of leadership redefine failure?
Well, there's a couple of things. In her Netflix special, which I highly encourage people to watch, Brene talks about, I want you to think about the most courageous thing that you've ever done, the most brave thing that you've ever done. Did it ever happen without you also feeling a sense of vulnerability? So we often look at vulnerability as one side of the continuum, and then bravery is the other, right? Or courage is the other. She said, you can't have courage absent vulnerability. There is no act of courage without some sense of the unknown and stepping into the unknown with the best information that you have at the moment. And so when you ask about brave leadership in crisis, I think about the fact that, systems are tested in crisis, their metals revealed. And when you don't have a script, you don't have the option of paralysis. You have to respond because people are looking to you for leadership. And so, design thinking gives you the permission to do something, but not get it perfect. And it gives you a way to do it in a way that's meaningful and responsive, because you're basing it in data that you're getting from people's hearts, minds, and actual quantitative information. It balances the quantitative, the qualitative, and the perception, which is oftentimes anchored in the heart and mind. And so, for us, it's been a journey. So I'm not going to lie. This isn't something that just happens overnight. So when you look at kind of a progression of how we got to where we are. For
Mhm.
us, the story of design thinking has been a multi-year thing. It's not like we just took it out of the box and suddenly it was magical. We watched 3 videos on YouTube and an RSA animation and got it. I mean, it really began with a college and career readiness initiative in 2009 and worked its way all the way to the COVID response. But particularly potent for us was this NASP partnership, your organization, because it was the first time in our district history that school teams, district teams sat together for 2 years through an experience, a shared experience, as we remember from coherence, right? So it wasn't just a team here leading us through a moment. It was a 2-year meaning making, remaking meaning, soaking into our bones leadership experience. And what's interesting is in curriculum, our essential question that we were working through, our design challenge was, how do we move from this perception that we are supposed to be content experts to the idea that we are content lead learners? How do
Mm.
we begin to explore this idea of brave leadership? We are no competition for Google. We are definitely no competition for all the stuff that keeps getting published and self-published. You've got Teachers Pay Teachers, you've got Pinterest. Well, we're not trying to compete. What
Mhm.
does it look like if we bring the expertise that we have in our content to our context, which is unique to us, and we partner with people in getting to the answer? Well,
Excellent.
guess what? That's work that we started 2 years ago. Guess what happened March 13th? We were,
The world changed.
and guess what we were called to be?
Yeah.
Lead learners, not all knowers, right? And so it's neat to see how it's all been positioned. And so I think it's important for us to be thinking about the definitions. Like when you look at design thinking, which is the next slide, a lot of people are familiar with it, and I'm not going to, teach it right now. It's far too, like there's more to say, but if you look at these honeycombs, the idea is that you start with this empathy, right? Like it's a human-centered design method. So you have to be listening to the people and watching and interacting with the people whose needs you're trying to meet before you define a really clear point of view and question that you're trying to answer. And so instead of assuming intention, you're really trying to listen and calibrate what it is that you're trying to solve. It's only then that you begin to ideate. I think a lot of us see crisis and we jump straight to that gold honeycomb, right? Ideate. We just start generating ideas because we feel an urgency and need to respond. Well, if we're not answering the right questions, sometimes our assumptions cause more damage. And so what's cool about ideation is it goes big, limits are gone, but then you begin to narrow and go through these rapid cycles of prototyping and testing to see what's actually going to stick. And you go from low resolution prototypes that could be a piece of paper and people reacting to it to full on interactive website going, does this feel closer to what we want? But through these cycles of prototyping and testing, you get closer to what's actually going to stick and create lasting change. And I love giving this example because, when people are thinking about design thinking, it's oftentimes very clinical, but it actually applies
What
to
does it look
relationships
like?
too. Oh, I'll tell you
Right.
what it looks like in my marriage. Because I think that, well, when you think low content, high process, this is high process. So we have 3 boys, and they are energetic. They are very energetic. Energetic. I don't know a better word. And I used to get updates, well, actually still do, through texting, through phone calls. I would get play-by-plays from my wife of all the ways that they were driving her crazy and breaking things in the house and things like that. And one day she texted me, I just feel like I'm not getting this right. I feel like I'm failing. And she was really hurting. Like she didn't feel valued. She didn't feel like what she was doing mattered. And so I thought to myself, this is an opportunity to empathize. So I defined the problem. I said to myself, how am I going to make my wife feel valued? How am I going to let her know that she's good? So I ideated all these things and, kind of sent out feelers to her and realized, you know what? I know what I'm going to do. And so after work, I went to Trader Joe's. I got her favorite wine. I got her favorite chocolate, and then got her favorite red box, flowers, and then went home. And I was like, she is going to love this. She can go watch her movie alone. I'll take the kids. She's got the flowers, the wine, the chocolate. I mean, nailed it. Walked in the door and there was fire coming out of her ears. And I thought to myself, this didn't go right. I'm holding all these beautiful things that, I mean, really, they should write a book about how to husband, right? I mean, this is amazing. And she did not appreciate it. And so I was super confused, set everything down, took her into a different room and talked to her. And I just said, I don't understand. I'm trying to make you feel valued. She said, sweetheart, I've been crying out for help all day. And you took 45 more minutes to extend my day so that you could do this nice thing for me that does not change the reality that I still have 3 boys in the other room fighting each other. She said, what I would have preferred is you coming home and letting me go for a walk or sit in the room with the iPad alone for 45 minutes. The flowers are beautiful. Thank you for the wine. Thank you for the chocolate. So what I realized in that moment is I had brought my assumptions into the empathy. I didn't actually ask her questions. I took in the data, made assumptions, and defined the wrong problem. And so when I went to go solve it, I missed the mark. Well, here we are $50 later, and I messed up. Imagine what it would have felt like had I begun to prototype some ideas with her, test them out with her before we actually got to the solution. So, you know, it's not always linear, right?
Iterative.
Sometimes, what's that?
It's iterative.
It's iterative, and sometimes it's not linear. Like, you're not always going to get to start at empathize. When the crisis hit, the define was clearer, right? It was, how are we going to go online? Now I can go gain some empathy, but then I got to jump straight to ideate. You don't always get to go in order. So when you think about the design process, sometimes it's the design mindsets that are more important. And I know we only have about 15 minutes left. So,
Yeah,
you know, it might be critical for us to talk about just kind of the mindset, because it's not always about, you know, every single process. So, you know, some of the core values are show, don't tell. Like, I can tell you all day long what I'm going to do, but giving people an opportunity to interact with something tangible gives you the data you need to make decisions. Focus on human values. Remember that we are a human-centered enterprise. And so if you're not constantly involving your people, and I'm not just talking about the teachers, but the community in the conversation, and if you're not constantly recalibrating your assumptions, sometimes you miss the mark. It's critical to craft clarity. It's a messy process. And so every so often, it's good to hit pause and go, what are we about? Are we still answering the question we thought we were answering? Or do we need more data? You have to embrace experimentation, because the reality is you're not going to get it right unless you begin to try something different, right? You need to think about it. These aren't normal times. You need to be mindful of process. Don't conflate things, right? Like, if I'm trying to empathize with you, I need to just empathize. I shouldn't be prototyping and testing the ideas that I want to do later. Be present to where you are in the process. And I love this, bias toward action. When crisis hits, a lot of times, you know, the total polar opposite of reactive is what I call analysis paralysis, where you get so into the analysis that you never actually do or try anything, and the system continues to crumble. And so we need to have a bias toward action, which is why prototyping and testing is beautiful, is because it allows you to do it quickly in a small way before you break the whole system. And then radical collaboration. Remember how we talked about sometimes the voices that you expect to rise up are different?
Yeah.
Crisis doesn't care about your title. Sometimes the best person with the answer is not the person you would expect to have it. So you better surround yourself with some voices that you don't anticipate having the answer, because they don't necessarily have a stake in the solution. So they're going to give you the total out of the box, break your thinking, amazing idea. And so these mindsets, if you can just hold them, you can have a design orientation without necessarily being design thinking trained. And what's interesting is even the authors of design thinking live this out. So you'll see that in that first image, there were 5 honeycombs. Well, look now, there's 2 more. There's notice and there's reflect, because you know what they've realized? They've realized that, you know, I can empathize through the lens of bias. The questions I ask you in order to gain empathy might be loaded questions that come from my frame of reference that I've never thought to question. And so they ask you to take a beat and to think about your identity, biases that you might be bringing, and assumptions that you might be making, even in how you're asking questions. And then the reflect at the end is, wait a minute, did this create the impact I wanted, or do I need to recalibrate me? Is there information that's missing? And am I even the one that should be asking the question? Maybe that's the problem. Maybe what I need to be doing is doing the listening and letting someone who knows how to ask the question, ask that question. And the cool thing with design thinking is, you know how we talked about the whole idea of failure? There's this beautiful overlay that comes over this that basically shows what it feels like if you're doing design thinking right. It
You're
is going to
absolutely
feel like a
correct.
design, yeah, it feels like a jumbled mess, right? Like you just feel like you're out of control. But if you're intentional and you're trying, eventually you get to that stability. But if it doesn't feel like this, it's too curated and it's probably not designed.
Yes. So tell us, there's the next slide. I think I want to pass that because we don't have that much time. And I
Okay.
want you to talk about the game storming slide, because there are people listening
Yeah.
who haven't been through this at all. They don't really, it's interesting, but they don't really know what principles they can pick up and begin to at least think about and apply. And I
Yeah.
think the slide can help them.
So, Rochelle Herring asked the question, how do you develop these mindsets? Well, Rochelle, part of it is practice. And so this book, Game Storming, is such a brilliant, and it's actually an online, they've gone online for free with all of their resources. So if you type Game Storming into your, search engine, you should be able to land on their website, where they have these amazing facilitation activities that will actually help you to actualize the design mindsets. And so in this example, one of the things that we think about is impact effort matrix. It's anchored in a goal. So when you think, how do we go online, right? Like how might we go online in 2 weeks for all students?
Yes.
It takes you through a process that allows you to map out choices that you have around the effort that it takes to implement and then its potential impact. And what's cool is that it helps you to begin to balance and evaluate suggested actions before you take them. And so when you think about what happens in crisis, and we'll talk about that in just a sec, but in crisis, a lot of times people just ideate and then you begin to implement the first thing or the thing that gains the most traction, right? So the thing that gets the most post-its tends to be what we do. But what if that's not the most effective?
That takes us into the next slide, right?
It does. It does.
Yes.
And so when you think about, what's a local challenge that you might want to tackle using design thinking? Let's think about this whole idea of like, how do we go online for the fall, right? Like a lot of us were planning hybrid models. We were planning partly in face, we were planning A/B schedules. What does
Right.
supervision look like? Whatever your question is, the way that this would play out is individually, you would have people sit in a room, that radical collaboration, and just generate ideas on a sticky note with one idea per sticky note.
Okay.
Each person would sit down and do that quietly 5-10 minutes. Just let them dump, brain dump, no limitations, no constraints. Then as a group, you begin to have each person share his or her ideas with the group. As that person shares, if you hear something that's similar to yours, you begin to place it with theirs. But then you begin to make some decisions. You'll notice on this matrix that the y-axis is the impact. That's the potential payoff of the action that you're going to have. Mm-hmm. And the x-axis is the effort. How much is it going to cost us to take this action? Now, cost isn't just money. Sometimes it's time, it's resources, it's folks. And so you group similar ideas and then you begin to see patterns, right? So you begin to ask yourself, where are these things going? And you begin to put them where they belong. Is it high impact, low effort? Is it high effort, low impact? And then you begin to make some decisions. The things that are high impact and low effort are going to be your early strategic wins where you gain momentum with visible results. This is going to be where you really get a tidal wave. You take it from a ripple into a tsunami of change. If you're looking at things that are going to be high effort, high impact, this is your long-term strategic planning. How are you going to get this stuff to stick? When you begin to think about the low impact, low effort, these are the nice quick activities to build capacity or buy-in one-on-one, but these aren't things that you're going to devote a lot of resources to. Mm-hmm. But if you need to sell someone on it and you need to get them on board, that's what you do. And then your low impact, high effort, those are the ideas that just need to go away. Those are the ideas that if you have an embarrassment of riches and you need to spend the money, you could try it because it doesn't matter, right? If it doesn't happen. But you want to focus on those top two quadrants. This effort alone is a design process. It helps you to ideate and then to begin to sort. You bring radical voices into the conversation. You begin to have a bias toward action. But what's cool is that your action is now informed and you're beginning to think about the impact of your decisions. And you get to do it in a thoughtful and structured way so that you're not just throwing Jello on a wall.
And you can do this without any other training. This could be a first step in just bringing your people together and and thinking about and actually focusing on a challenge, an identified
That's
and or
exactly right.
defined challenge. This was absolutely, I loved it. I've learned a lot today. I've even gotten some new ideas about what we could do with the School Leaders Academy to broaden what we're thinking about around design thinking and how to get that out there and share that with others. This has been wonderful. I don't know how much time we have left. Have you looked in the Q&A?
I have. We have about 8 minutes.
We have about 8 minutes. Okay. I see one question. I think you may have already answered that question.
I think it's a statement. It looks like if we're designing a new learning model and aligning with the student, do we do away with grade levels and allow them to progress at their pace? So I love that idea. I think it's brilliant. I think if you're going to do this, especially at the secondary level, then we need to begin thinking about how do we invite our university partners to the table?
Yep.
Right, because a lot of those constraints tend to come from, college admissions, because in our innovation and in our desire K-12 to do something brilliant, what we don't want to do is have our brilliant choices that really impress us limit the options that kids have when they have to graduate. So I personally have no issue with kids accelerating their learning. I can tell you how we've been experimenting with that locally. One of the things that we did was during the crisis, we began to think about, our teachers are different developmental levels with technology implementation. It is not fair to flip a switch and go, congratulations, you're now the University of Phoenix, figure it out. Well, while teachers are also trying to learn, we have students that are waiting to learn, right? And so how do we get kids into contact with amazing teachers that can help them so that we don't end up with all this learning loss? Sal Khan of the Khan Academy called us with a great idea, and then we ended up partnering and implementing it. It's a concept called schoolhouse.world, where we took 50 to 70 of our most proficient, technologically proficient, and content effective teachers, and we trained them in how to provide 20 to 30 minute, almost like mini sessions with kids, where it wasn't an overstructured lesson, but it was anchored in content that the kids were building demand around. So kids would go into the system, they would identify where they needed help. Teachers on the other side would see demand levels being built and would begin to offer 20 to 30 minute drop-ins for any kid in the district. So every student had the ability to connect with any teacher who was offering sessions to help them in their learning process while they were waiting for more structured, perhaps, instruction in their own class or to supplement it. But what's really cool is the kids drove, the teachers responded, and learning continued.
That is innovation in action, if I haven't heard it. I love it. We have to wrap up now, so I'm going to thank you again, my dear friend. This has been wonderful. I've learned a lot. I'm sure our participants have learned some things. We may get some additional questions later that we could address in writing or however Digital Promise would like us to do that. But thanks again so much for you sharing your experience and your expertise. We hope you'll join us for our next webinar on July 28th at 1 p.m. Bridging the Digital Divide and Providing Access to All Shelby County Students, where Memphis Superintendent Dr. Joris Ray will share his story of securing devices and internet access for 90,000 students. As you exit, please take a moment to complete our survey to help guide the development of future webinars in this series. Thanks and take care.